Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to explore a story, not just of a person but of a transformation. Joe Ranga, A Journey Reimagined, is a tale of how a life can evolve when vision meets courage, when failure meets resilience, and when purpose becomes the path forward. Joe Ranga's journey was not built in comfort. It was shaped by challenges, rebuilt through reflection, and elevated by relentless pursuit. His story teaches us that reinvention is never accidental. It is intentional, thoughtful, and brave. This journey reimagined begins with self-awareness, understanding who you are and who you must become. It continues with breaking boundaries, challenging outdated beliefs, and stepping into uncertain spaces with boldness. Joe discovered that the greatest transformations happen when we dare to rewrite our own narrative. He learned to turn setbacks into strategies, criticism into creativity, and doubt into discipline. Today, his reimagined journey inspires countless individuals to embrace change, rethink possibilities, and step into their superior selves. His message is simple: your destiny is not written, it is designed. And when you choose to redesign your life, your story becomes a legacy. Self-awareness is the very first step in Joe Ranga's reimagined journey because it acts as the mirror that reveals not only who we are, but also who we have the potential to become. For Joe, self-awareness did not arrive as a sudden realization. It was a gradual awakening that came from moments of silence, introspection, and even discomfort. He had to face truths about himself that he once avoided, the habits that held him back, the fears he buried, the strengths he underestimated, and the dreams he pushed aside because he believed they were too big for him. In this phase of his journey, Joe understood that transformation cannot begin without clarity. You cannot redirect a life you do not fully understand. So he began asking himself deeper questions. What do I truly want? What am I running from? What patterns am I repeating? What am I capable of when I stop doubting myself? These questions created space for honest reflection. Reflection that was not sugar-coated or filtered through ego but grounded in truth. Through this, Joe recognized the importance of emotional awareness. He learned to observe his reactions, his triggers, and his motivations. Instead of being controlled by frustration, insecurity, or hesitation, he studied them. He understood that every emotion was a message, every fear was a signal, and every doubt was a doorway to understanding himself better. Joe also forced himself to confront his blind spots, the areas where he thought he was doing fine, but was actually limiting his own growth. This required humility. It required accepting that sometimes the biggest obstacle is not the world outside, but the beliefs within. By acknowledging his shortcomings, he dismantled the barriers he unknowingly built around himself. As this awareness grew stronger, he began to see his strengths with new clarity. He discovered abilities he had overlooked, talents he hadn't fully tapped into, and inner qualities that were powerful enough to redefine his direction. Self-awareness didn't just show him what needed to change. It reminded him of everything he already had within him to build something extraordinary. Most importantly, Joe realized that self-awareness is not a one-time breakthrough. It is a continuous practice. It is the ongoing choice to be honest with yourself, to evaluate your actions, to understand your emotions, and to adjust your path with intention. Through self-awareness, Joe reimagined not only his journey but his identity, building a foundation strong enough to support growth, change, and an entirely new version of himself. For Joe Ranga, embracing change was not a simple decision. It was a turning point that required him to confront everything familiar, comfortable, and predictable in his life. Change is often portrayed as a natural part of growth, but in reality, it is one of the most intimidating forces we face. Joe discovered that stepping into a reimagined journey meant stepping away from the version of himself that no longer served his future. This demanded courage not because change is glamorous but because it is uncertain. Joe's courage did not come from confidence, it came from necessity. He reached a moment where staying the same felt more painful than evolving. To embrace change, he had to let go of old patterns, outdated routines, and environments that kept him small. He had to detach from the opinions that shaped him, the doubts that restricted him, and the fears that whispered he might fail. Every shift in his life started with the bravery to move even when he wasn't fully prepared. He realized that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to act despite its presence. Joe had to accept that fear is a natural companion of transformation. Instead of resisting it, he learned to understand it. Fear reminded him that he was entering new territory. It signaled that he was stretching beyond what he once thought possible. And with every step forward, the fear began to lose its power. Embracing change also taught Joe the value of adaptability. Life did not unfold the way he expected, and his journey required constant adjustments. Rather than resisting new circumstances, he learned to respond with flexibility. This adaptability became a hidden strength. It allowed him to pivot when necessary, to innovate when old methods failed, and to stay strong when uncertainty tested his resolve. Another crucial realization for Joe was that change is not a single event. It is a continuous process. Every stage of life demands a new version of you. He understood that evolving once was not enough. He had to keep evolving, keep learning, and keep shedding layers that no longer aligned with his purpose. This mindset transformed change from a threat into an opportunity. Most significantly, Joe's courage empowered him to reimagine his identity. With every bold decision, he discovered new angles of his potential. Change sculpted him, strengthened him, and revealed qualities he never knew he possessed. The courage to embrace change didn't just shift his path, it reshaped his entire relationship with life, turning uncertainty into possibility and fear into fuel. For Joe Ranga, setbacks were not just obstacles. They were defining moments that revealed his true strength and direction. In the early stages of his journey, he viewed setbacks the way most people do, as failures, disappointments, or signs that he wasn't good enough. But as he reimagined his path, he began to see them differently. Each setback held a hidden message, a lesson, and a blueprint for improvement. Instead of allowing challenges to break him, he learned how to transform them into strategies that moved him forward. Every setback Joe faced forced him to pause, reflect, and analyze the deeper reason behind it. At first, the reflection was uncomfortable because it required honesty. It demanded looking at what went wrong, what he overlooked, and what he needed to change. But slowly, he realized that setbacks were not the opposite of progress. They were the foundation of progress. They highlighted weaknesses he hadn't noticed, exposed blind spots he needed to fix, and showed him where his methods needed refinement. Joe came to understand that setbacks are powerful teachers. They reveal truths that success often hides. When things go well, it's easy to overlook flaws. But when something falls apart, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Instead of becoming frustrated, he developed the habit of breaking down every setback like a puzzle. What caused this? What can I learn from this? How can I adjust my approach? That mindset transformed failure from a dead end into a strategic advantage. One of the biggest shifts in Joe's journey was learning to detach emotionally from setbacks. Instead of seeing them as personal attacks or reflections of his worth, he began to see them as data, information that could help him grow. This emotional maturity allowed him to stay focused, calm, and objective even when things did not go according to plan. With clarity replacing panic, he could map out stronger strategies for the next attempt. Joe also discovered that setbacks often force us to innovate. When the old way stops working, you are pushed to think differently, approach problems from new angles, and develop skills you didn't know you needed. Many of Joe's greatest breakthroughs came directly from moments when he felt stuck. It was in those moments that creativity took over, helping him find solutions that were far more effective than the ones he originally relied on. Another profound realization Joe had was that setbacks test commitment. Anyone can stay motivated when everything is going smoothly, but dedication is proven only when the road becomes difficult. Setbacks forced Joe to choose between giving up or growing. Each time he chose growth, he became stronger, wiser, and more prepared for future challenges. Through this process, Joe redefined his relationship with failure. He realized that setbacks were not signs of weakness but signs that he was trying, learning, and evolving. By transforming every setback into a strategy, he built a mindset that was resilient, adaptable, and unstoppable. For a long time, Joe Ranga lived within the boundaries of beliefs he never questioned. These beliefs weren't entirely his own. They were shaped by his environment, his experiences, his upbringing, and even the limitations others placed on him. As he walked through life, these beliefs quietly influenced his decisions, his confidence, and the way he saw his future. But when Joe reached a point where he wanted to reimagine his journey, he realized he had to confront something deeper than external obstacles. He had to challenge the outdated beliefs living inside him. Old beliefs often feel like truth, not because they are accurate but because they are familiar. Joe came to understand that the most dangerous limits are not the ones the world sets for you, they are the ones you accept without questioning. He began examining the thoughts that shaped his behavior. I'm not ready yet. Maybe this is the best I can do. What if I fail? What will people think? These mental scripts had controlled him for years. But now he recognized them for what they were, invisible cages. Breaking these beliefs required courage, patience, and mental discipline. Joe forced himself to challenge the validity of each limiting belief. He asked, who told me this? Why do I believe this? Is this helping me or holding me back? Slowly, he started replacing fear-based assumptions with reality-based truth. He discovered that many of the beliefs he held onto weren't rooted in facts. They were rooted in past experiences he had outgrown. Another powerful realization for Joe was understanding that beliefs are often inherited. We pick up ideas from society, peers, family, and failures, and without noticing, we begin to live by them. Joe noticed how many of his beliefs were not aligned with the person he wanted to become. They were aligned with the person he once was. This disconnect motivated him to rewrite the mental framework that shaped his identity. As Joe challenged these old beliefs, he stepped into a new level of freedom. He realized he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. Every time he broke a belief, a new possibility appeared. The world did not change, his perception of himself changed. And perception is what determines action. He also learned that challenging beliefs is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. Even as he grew, new doubts appeared. New fears tried to take root. But Joe developed the discipline to question every thought that attempted to limit him. This mental strength became one of his greatest advantages. By dismantling old beliefs, Joe discovered the power of inner liberation. He understood that reinventing your journey starts with reinventing your mindset. The moment he stopped accepting outdated beliefs as truth, he opened the door to a new identity, new opportunities, and a life shaped by intention rather than limitation. For Joe Ranga, creativity was not merely an artistic skill or a talent reserved for special moments. It became a survival tool, a way to navigate the unpredictable twists of his reimagined journey. When life shifted and the familiar paths no longer worked, creativity stepped forward as the force that helped him rebuild, rethink, and redirect. Joe learned that creativity is not about paint, music, or design. It is about how you think when the world stops making sense in the usual ways. Early in his journey, Joe depended on routine and structure. He believed success came from following a predictable pattern. But as he encountered setbacks, obstacles, and new challenges, he realized that rigid thinking only trapped him. When the path was blocked, logic alone wasn't enough. That was when creativity became essential. It pushed him to find alternate routes, to imagine possibilities where others only saw problems, and to turn uncertainty into opportunity. Creativity taught Joe how to reinvent situations rather than submit to them. Instead of saying, "This won't work," he began asking, "How else could this work?" That shift unlocked solutions he never would have discovered through linear thinking. It allowed him to see his challenges not as walls, but as puzzles waiting for a new approach. Creativity transformed obstacles into stepping stones. Joe also discovered that creativity thrives in discomfort. The moments when he felt lost, overwhelmed, or stuck were the moments when his mind was forced to think differently. Instead of resisting discomfort, he started embracing it as a spark for innovation. When everything familiar fell apart, creativity gave him the courage to explore new ideas, experiment with new strategies, and develop new strengths. Another profound shift in Joe's journey was realizing that creativity is a mindset, not a moment. It is the willingness to challenge assumptions, to imagine alternatives, and to take risks without knowing the outcome. Creativity empowered him to detach from conventional thinking and trust his inner instincts. It gave him the freedom to build his path rather than follow one. Joe also began using creativity to solve emotional and personal challenges. When stress rose, he didn't just push through it, he searched for creative ways to manage it. When motivation dropped, he found unconventional strategies to reignite it. When relationships became difficult, he used empathy and imaginative thinking to communicate more effectively. Creativity made him adaptable not just in action but in mindset. Most importantly, Joe realized that in a fast-changing world, creativity is a form of resilience. It allows you to reinvent yourself, your plans, and your future. It keeps you moving even when circumstances force you to change direction. For Joe, creativity became the tool that kept him evolving, learning, and surviving through the most challenging chapters of his reimagined journey. For Joe Ranga, one of the greatest battles on his reimagined journey was not against the world. It was against his own doubt. Doubt came in many forms: hesitation, fear, insecurity, overthinking, and the quiet inner voice that constantly questioned whether he was capable, deserving, or prepared. In the past, Joe allowed doubt to slow him down, to interrupt his momentum, and to make him second-guess opportunities that were within his reach. But as he progressed, he discovered a truth that changed everything. Discipline is stronger than doubt. Discipline did not erase doubt from Joe's life, it simply overpowered it. When his mind whispered reasons to quit, discipline reminded him of the reasons he started. When he felt unprepared, discipline pushed him to take the next step anyway. When doubt tried to paralyze him, discipline forced him to move forward with consistency. He realized that success is rarely about feeling confident, it is about acting even when you don't. At the beginning, Joe believed discipline meant following strict routines. But as he grew, he understood that discipline is deeper than schedules. It is the commitment to your future self. It is the decision to show up every day, even when motivation is low, even when progress is slow, even when no one is watching. Discipline became the quiet engine behind his growth. Joe also learned that doubt often appears when you're close to evolution. It tries to keep you comfortable, familiar, and safe. But safe does not equal successful. Every time he stepped into something new, doubt tried to pull him back with questions like, "Are you sure? What if you fail? What will people think?" But instead of debating his doubts, Joe chose discipline. He followed his plan, trusted his effort, and continued moving. Discipline also taught Joe the value of habits. He built small, powerful routines that strengthened his mind and body. These habits became anchors, steady, consistent actions that protected him from emotional swings. When doubt tried to sabotage his mindset, habits held him steady. They reminded him that progress comes from repetition, not perfection. One of the biggest transformations came when Joe realized discipline is an act of self-respect. Every time he kept a promise to himself, he rebuilt his confidence. Every time he followed through, he proved that his effort was stronger than his fear. Slowly, discipline rewired his identity. He stopped seeing himself as someone who hesitated and started seeing himself as someone who followed through. Joe also discovered that discipline is not a punishment, it is freedom. It frees you from overthinking because you know what needs to be done. It frees you from regret because you take action instead of postponing. It frees you from fear because you trust your preparation. While doubt made him feel stuck and uncertain, discipline made him feel grounded and empowered. Most importantly, Joe understood that doubt is temporary, but discipline builds a lasting foundation. Doubt comes in emotional waves, rising and falling depending on circumstances. But discipline is a choice that strengthens your character, sharpens your focus, and pushes your life forward no matter how loud doubt becomes. For much of his early journey, Joe Ranga misunderstood solitude. He believed being alone meant being isolated, disconnected, or left behind. But as his path evolved, he discovered that solitude is not emptiness, it is space. Space to think, to feel, to reset, and to reconnect with parts of himself he had ignored for years. What once felt like loneliness slowly transformed into one of the most powerful sources of self-strength. Solitude offered Joe something the world rarely gives: silence. In a life filled with noise, opinions, expectations, and competition, silence became a rare form of clarity. It allowed him to hear his own thoughts without interference. It separated his true desires from the goals society tried to impose on him. In that silence, he discovered who he really was when no one was watching, when no one was judging, and when no one's expectations were shaping his choices. Joe learned that solitude is not a punishment, it is a teacher. It revealed patterns he needed to break, habits he needed to develop, and emotions he needed to understand. Alone with his thoughts, he became aware of how much he had been running from himself, distracting himself with noise instead of addressing the questions that truly mattered. Solitude forced him to confront the parts of his character he had avoided, and through that confrontation he grew stronger. In these quiet moments, Joe discovered that true confidence begins internally, not externally. When you learn to stand strong alone, you become unshakable around others. Solitude helped him build emotional independence, the ability to stay anchored without relying on constant validation, approval, or support from people around him. He realized that personal power is born from self-trust, and solitude was the environment where that trust began to grow. Another important lesson Joe learned was that solitude sparks creativity and clarity. When there is space in the mind, ideas have room to breathe. Solutions appear. Visions sharpen. Plans become clearer. Joe began using solitude not as an escape but as a strategy. Whenever he felt lost, overwhelmed, or unfocused, he returned to quiet moments to realign himself. It was in these moments that he gained the deepest insights into his purpose and the steps he needed to take next. Solitude also strengthened Joe's emotional resilience. Without constant external input, he learned to manage his thoughts, regulate his emotions, and understand his triggers. Instead of reacting impulsively, he began responding with intention. He built a calmness within himself that no chaos around him could easily break. This inner stability became one of his greatest advantages. Most profoundly, Joe realized that solitude teaches gratitude. When you strip away distractions, you begin to appreciate the smallest details: your growth, your thoughts, your dreams, your peace. It made him value meaningful relationships instead of superficial ones. It helped him choose people with intention rather than desperation. Solitude made him whole, and through that wholeness he learned how to show up better in the world. Ultimately, solitude became a space of transformation, a place where Joe could rebuild, rethink, and rediscover himself with honesty and depth. It showed him that strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are when everything else falls away. For most of his early life, Joe Ranga lived with an identity shaped by circumstances rather than intention. He carried labels given to him by his environment, expectations assigned by others, and limitations he unknowingly accepted as truth. But as his journey evolved, Joe realized that identity is not something you inherit. It is something you build. And rebuilding identity became one of the most transformative chapters of his reimagined path. Joe understood that identity is powerful because it shapes every decision, reaction, and ambition. If you believe you are limited, your actions will reflect limitation. If you believe you are capable, your choices will reflect possibility. To move forward, Joe had to reconstruct the very foundation of how he saw himself. This wasn't a small shift. It required unlearning years of assumptions and rewiring habits, thoughts, and beliefs that held him back. The first step in rebuilding his identity was self-awareness. Joe devoted time to understanding who he truly was, not who he had been told to be. He examined his strengths, weaknesses, passions, and fears. He confronted uncomfortable truths about his behavior, mindset, and patterns. This self-awareness acted as a mirror, allowing him to see the parts of himself he wanted to preserve and the parts he needed to release. As he uncovered these truths, Joe began shaping an identity rooted in intention rather than pressure. He asked himself, who do I want to become? What qualities do I want to embody? What actions align with the future I envision? These questions helped him design a new identity defined by purpose, clarity, and confidence. It wasn't about creating a perfect version of himself. It was about creating a true one. Rebuilding identity also required Joe to break from the roles he had been playing. He had to step away from people who only recognized an older version of him. He had to distance himself from environments that encouraged stagnation. He had to redefine his boundaries, values, and priorities. This process demanded courage because it often meant disappointing others to stay loyal to his growth. But Joe learned that staying loyal to the wrong identity is far more damaging than learning to stand alone for the right one. One of the most powerful lessons Joe discovered was that identity is built through action. You cannot think your way into a new version of yourself. You have to act your way into it. Every disciplined choice, every bold step, every uncomfortable challenge contributed to the person he was becoming. Over time, his identity became a reflection of his consistency rather than his past. Joe also learned to forgive himself for the mistakes he made when he operated from his old identity. He realized that growth requires compassion. You cannot build a stronger self if you are constantly criticizing yourself. By forgiving his past, he freed himself to create a future unburdened by regret or shame. Through this reconstruction, Joe discovered an inner alignment he had never felt before. His actions began to match his values. His goals matched his purpose. His confidence began to grow naturally because it was rooted in authenticity, not performance. He no longer needed to impress others to feel worthy. His new identity came from within. Most importantly, Joe learned that identity is not fixed. It is an evolving masterpiece. With every lesson, with every challenge, with every breakthrough, he continued shaping himself with intention and clarity. Rebuilding his identity with purpose became the compass that guided his transformation, helping him walk not as who he once was, but as who he was consciously becoming. As Joe Ranga progressed through his journey, he began to understand a truth that many people overlook in a world obsessed with speed. Real growth takes time. In the past, Joe believed progress had to be fast, dramatic, and constantly visible to others. He equated speed with success and quiet progress with failure. But as he evolved, he realized that some of the most meaningful transformations happen slowly, quietly, and internally, long before any visible results appear. Slow growth forced Joe to develop patience, something he once struggled with. He had to learn to trust the process even when nothing seemed to be changing on the outside. He discovered that slow growth is not a sign of weakness but a sign of stability. It builds depth, resilience, and long-term strength. Fast success might impress people, but slow success transforms you. Joe also learned that slow growth often requires letting go of comparison. When he looked at others who seemed to be ahead, achieving more, moving faster, progressing quicker, he felt pressure to rush his own journey. But comparison distracted him from his path. He eventually understood that growth cannot be measured by someone else's timeline. Everyone begins at a different point, faces different challenges, and carries different responsibilities. Slow growth gave Joe the freedom to focus on his own pace without feeling inferior or behind. Another profound shift happened when Joe realized slow growth allowed him to build character, not just results. With time, he developed emotional intelligence, discipline, consistency, and self-awareness, qualities that come from experience, not speed. Every small step strengthened his mindset. Every steady effort built a stable foundation. Slow growth taught him to value effort over applause and progress over perfection. Joe also discovered the beauty of subtle progress. There were days when he felt like he was moving in circles, making no progress at all, but when he looked back months later, he saw how far he had come. Slow growth is often invisible in the moment and obvious in hindsight. It taught Joe to appreciate the quiet victories, waking up with more clarity, feeling more confident, thinking more positively, reacting with more wisdom. These inner shifts were proof that growth was happening beneath the surface. One of the greatest gifts of slow growth was learning to enjoy the journey itself. Instead of rushing to reach the destination, Joe learned to appreciate each stage of the process. The struggles, the learning, the breakthroughs, and even the setbacks. He discovered that growth is not just about becoming someone else. It is about understanding yourself more deeply. Slow growth gave him space to reflect, adjust, and evolve at a sustainable pace. Joe also realized that slow growth helps eliminate ego. When progress takes time, you learn humility, patience, and gratitude. You stop chasing validation because the process becomes more meaningful than the recognition. Slow growth taught him that the real reward is who you become along the way, not just what you accomplish. Most importantly, Joe discovered that slow growth is lasting growth. Fast achievements can disappear as quickly as they appear, but the lessons learned through steady effort stay with you forever. Slow growth builds roots, deep, strong, and unshakable. It ensures that when success finally arrives, it stands on a foundation capable of holding it. For Joe Ranga, one of the most transformative shifts in his journey was learning to cultivate a vision that extended far beyond the boundaries of what seemed possible. Early in life, he often limited his goals to what felt safe, familiar, or achievable based on his current circumstances. He measured potential against fear, constraints, and the expectations of others. But as he reimagined his path, Joe realized that true transformation begins when you dare to envision more, when your imagination dares to stretch beyond perceived limitations. Cultivating this kind of vision required Joe to step outside of comfort and familiarity. He had to question everything he thought he knew about his capabilities and the world around him. Every time he doubted what was possible, he reminded himself that the human mind often underestimates what it can achieve. The limits he once believed in were often invisible fences, built from past failures, societal norms, or internalized fears. Vision, he discovered, is the tool that breaks those fences. Joe also realized that vision is more than a goal, it is a guiding compass. It provides clarity when the path is uncertain and motivation when the road feels long. By envisioning a future that inspired him, he could navigate present challenges with purpose. Even setbacks and obstacles became part of the larger story he was creating, rather than interruptions or failures. Vision allowed him to see the bigger picture, to align daily actions with long-term aspirations, and to act with intention rather than impulse. Another key lesson Joe learned was that cultivating vision requires imagination paired with discipline. It is not enough to dream of a better life, you must also commit to the consistent actions necessary to make that dream real. Vision without action remains wishful thinking. Action without vision becomes aimless effort. Joe merged these two forces, ensuring that every step he took had purpose, even when the results were not immediately visible. Joe also understood the power of visualizing success in vivid detail. He spent time imagining not only the outcomes he desired but also the processes, challenges, and growth that would accompany them. This visualization strengthened his belief in the possibility of what he wanted to achieve. It trained his mind to recognize opportunities and solutions that aligned with his larger vision, even in moments of doubt or uncertainty. Importantly, cultivating a vision beyond limits also demanded courage and resilience. To dream big is to risk failure, rejection, and criticism. But Joe learned to view these risks as necessary parts of growth. A vision that does not stretch you is a vision that cannot transform you. By embracing audacious goals, he expanded the scope of his own potential, discovering inner reserves of creativity, resourcefulness, and persistence he had not previously known. Joe also recognized that a compelling vision attracts alignment. People, resources, and opportunities tend to respond to clarity of purpose. When he communicated his vision with confidence and conviction, he naturally drew support, mentorship, and collaboration, even from unexpected sources. Vision became not just a personal compass, but a magnetic force for building the world around him that matched his aspirations. Most profoundly, Joe realized that vision is not static. It grows as you grow. By continually expanding his vision, he challenged himself to evolve, innovate, and reach higher than he ever thought possible. A vision beyond limits is not just a destination. It is a lifelong horizon that inspires continual transformation and ensures that your journey never stagnates. For Joe Ranga, resilience was not an innate trait. It was a skill forged through repeated encounters with challenges, obstacles, and adversity. Early in his journey, setbacks often felt overwhelming, leaving him frustrated, discouraged, or unsure of his next move. But over time, Joe learned that the true measure of strength is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to respond to it, adapt, and continue moving forward. Resilience became the backbone of his reimagined journey. Joe discovered that challenges are like mirrors. They reflect both your vulnerabilities and your potential. When faced with obstacles, he didn't shy away. Instead, he examined them closely to understand what they revealed about his mindset, habits, and strategies. Each challenge taught him a lesson about perseverance, patience, and self-reliance. He began to see that difficulties are not interruptions to progress. They are essential building blocks of growth. Another important lesson Joe learned was that resilience requires a shift in perspective. Rather than viewing hardships as failures or punishments, he began to see them as opportunities to strengthen his problem-solving skills, enhance his emotional intelligence, and discover hidden capabilities. He realized that every challenge contained valuable insight if he approached it with curiosity rather than fear. This mindset allowed him to navigate obstacles with creativity, composure, and determination. Joe also understood that resilience is cultivated through consistency and preparation. Small, repeated efforts to face discomfort, manage stress, and take responsibility for outcomes gradually strengthened his mental and emotional fortitude. By consistently confronting difficulties, even minor ones, he trained himself to remain steady under pressure. Resilience was no longer a reaction. It became a habit, a default mode of approaching life's uncertainties. A critical aspect of building resilience for Joe was embracing discomfort instead of avoiding it. He recognized that growth almost always exists outside the comfort zone, and the more he leaned into discomfort, the more capable he became of handling future challenges. Each time he navigated a difficult situation successfully, his confidence and self-trust expanded, creating a cycle of resilience that reinforced itself. Joe also discovered the role of adaptability in resilience. Challenges rarely arrive in predictable forms, and rigid thinking can lead to frustration or failure. By remaining flexible, open-minded, and willing to adjust his strategies, Joe turned obstacles into stepping stones rather than roadblocks. Adaptability allowed him to transform uncertainty into opportunity, and adversity into advantage. Importantly, Joe realized that resilience is both an internal and external process. Internally, it involves managing thoughts, emotions, and self-belief. Externally, it involves taking decisive action despite fear, uncertainty, or limited resources. By combining inner strength with proactive behavior, he created a resilient framework capable of withstanding setbacks and sustaining long-term progress. Most profoundly, Joe learned that challenges are not permanent, but the lessons and strength gained from them are. Each obstacle he overcame became a testament to his capacity to endure, adapt, and grow. Through repeated experience, resilience evolved from a reactive response to a defining characteristic, empowering him to face life with confidence, courage, and unwavering determination. For Joe Ranga, one of the pivotal realizations in his reimagined journey was the importance of mentorship. Early on, he attempted to navigate his path alone, believing that relying on others would diminish his independence or show weakness. Yet as he faced complex challenges and sought higher levels of growth, he understood that mentorship is not a crutch, it is a catalyst. The guidance, wisdom, and perspective of experienced mentors became invaluable tools in shaping his decisions and accelerating his progress. Joe discovered that mentors offer more than technical advice. They provide clarity of vision. When he felt stuck or uncertain, mentors helped him see possibilities he couldn't recognize on his own. They shared lessons from their own successes and failures, allowing Joe to anticipate challenges and avoid pitfalls. In doing so, mentorship became a shortcut to knowledge, helping him make informed choices without having to experience every hardship firsthand. Another critical insight was that mentorship fosters accountability. Joe learned that having someone he respected monitoring his growth and progress kept him disciplined and focused. Mentors challenged him to stretch beyond his comfort zone, to tackle goals that seemed intimidating, and to persist even when he doubted himself. Their belief in his potential often served as a mirror, reflecting strengths he hadn't yet acknowledged in himself. Joe also realized that mentorship is a two-way street. While he received guidance, he contributed his own perspective, energy, and dedication. By engaging actively with mentors, he not only absorbed knowledge but also developed critical thinking, adaptability, and humility. This collaborative dynamic helped him internalize lessons more effectively than any solitary effort could have. Mentorship also taught Joe the importance of diverse perspectives. Each mentor brought a unique set of experiences, skills, and viewpoints. By seeking insights from different sources, he avoided narrow thinking and broadened his understanding of possibilities. He learned that the best solutions often emerge from integrating multiple perspectives, and mentors provided the lenses through which he could see beyond his own limitations. Perhaps the most profound lesson Joe gained from mentorship was the value of inspiration and belief. Mentors showed him that extraordinary achievements are possible. Their stories, struggles, and triumphs motivated him to dream bigger and work harder. They demonstrated that setbacks are temporary, and consistent effort aligned with purpose leads to transformation. This mentorship-driven inspiration became a critical force in sustaining his momentum. Joe also realized that mentorship builds networks. Beyond advice and support, mentors connected him to opportunities, resources, and communities that accelerated his growth. These connections amplified his reach, giving him access to knowledge, experiences, and collaborations that would have taken years to acquire alone. Mentorship, therefore, was both guidance and gateway. Most importantly, Joe learned that mentorship is not a one-time event but a continuous relationship. By seeking guidance throughout his journey, he ensured that his growth was informed, strategic, and aligned with his vision. Mentorship taught him that even the most capable individuals do not succeed in isolation. Wisdom shared, perspectives broadened, and support given can transform a journey from ordinary to extraordinary. As we reflect on Joe Ranga's extraordinary journey, one truth becomes clear. Transformation is not a single moment, nor is it a destination. It is a continuous journey of self-awareness, courage, resilience, and purpose. From embracing change and turning setbacks into strategies, to challenging old beliefs, cultivating creativity, and building discipline over doubt, every step of Joe's path demonstrates that growth is intentional, deliberate, and unending. His journey teaches us that solitude can reveal strength, mentorship can illuminate the path, and service can create impact far beyond ourselves. It reminds us that vision, slow growth, and continuous learning are not luxuries. They are essential tools for anyone who dares to reimagine their life. Joe Ranga's story is more than a personal triumph. It is a blueprint for all of us. It is proof that with self-awareness, courage, persistence, and an unyielding commitment to growth, we too can redefine who we are, expand what we are capable of, and create a life of purpose, meaning, and impact. So, let us take inspiration from Joe's journey and commit ourselves to our own path of reimagination, because the potential within us is only as limited as the vision we dare to embrace.